There he is. There he is, Vincenzo, Vinny, FBI.
What's
How
up?
you doing, man?
Good, man. Good to see you. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Doing all right. This case is the latest crime of the century. It's the latest one of these
Yeah.
very public, intriguing cases that people kind of latch onto and want to be amateur investigators and detectives and coroners. Me and you were talking about this a little bit back and forth through texts, and you had an interesting take on it before they found Gabby's body, which we're assuming is Gabby's body, about the guy's demeanor during that hour and 17-minute long stop. What was your take on it when you saw that?
Yeah, it was surprising. So I spent a lot of time and an inordinate amount of time watching interrogation videos and interviews and police stop videos. It's something I could do while I'm working. And so like I could put it on another screen here. I just find the whole thing very, very fascinating. So when I first heard about the story, I heard there was a video released of the car stop. So I wanted to go online, and it was completely the opposite of what I expected in a lot of ways. And this has nothing to do with ultimate guilt or innocence of the guy. This has more to do with what you would expect to see in a video that tells you, hey, there was a DV incident, domestic violence incident, that preceded the disappearance. And then you watch the video, and what you find is that he's actually the victim of the domestic violence.
Very surprising. That's not the way it usually goes, right?
No. And the other thing that I found very, very interesting from a kind of body language and interview perspective is that he, in my opinion, absolutely was trying to protect her from the police in a very legitimate, genuine way. So not in the there's the person who says they're trying to protect somebody, but surreptitiously, subtly, they're actually throwing the person under the bus, right? And when someone asks a question about somebody and you're genuinely trying to cover, there's ways to answer that, right?
Like, wait, you know, this just reminded me of course, Seinfeld, when George is going out with the girl that's in jail and she's up for parole, and he goes,
right.
oh yeah, she's got plenty of plans, schemes, getting the old gang back together.
Perfect example.
Just trying to fuck her over.
Exactly. So he could say, on a word basis, he could say, look what I said. Obviously, I was sticking up for her. But the things we pick up on when we're judging whether someone's being honest with us, if you're really looking at that, you're like, why would he gratuitously mention the gang and plans and schemes?
Right, schemes.
Right. And what you saw with him when he got pulled over was right out of the gate, he had a very positive demeanor. When he was being asked about the injuries, he was downplaying them in a way consistent with people who are victims of domestic violence. He was downplaying them in a genuine, like, oh, it's not, that she might have, hit whatever, or with the scratch on the arm, even with the steering where he hits the curb.
Right.
He says she grabbed the wheel, right? He doesn't say she hit my arm.
She hit my arm. Right.
If you're looking to throw someone under the bus, or even subtly, you might say, well, she hit my arm and that caused me to jerk. He actually says she grabbed the wheel, and the cop notes that later, that she says she hit him. And he said she grabbed the wheel because he's trying to protect her. Now, this is what's funny. He might have been trying to protect them from the police for various different reasons. He might have had the idea in his mind to murder her at that point already.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying he's a hero. I'm just saying that what was surprising was that he genuinely was the victim in that, and had that been reversed, the roles were reversed.
Right.
He would have been in handcuffs in the first 3 minutes.
He's going. Now, as somebody who I have been involved in a domestic violence complaint a few years back. And I'll say something. When you're talking to the cops earlier, the cops showed up at my house, by the way, hours before the actual event that I wound up getting arrested for happened. They showed up, and I was trying to downplay it. She was absolutely the one hitting and fucking throwing shit. I was trying my best to downplay it just to get rid of the cops because, and by the way, this wasn't to protect her.
No,
it was very self-serving.
Yeah.
I just didn't want anything to be involved in a domestic violence dispute. I'm like, this is me saving my ass to not have for them to haul her away. I don't want that. I did. Now, in hindsight, of course I would have wanted that. But if they would have said, look, you got to leave his house. If I would have kept at it, the cops would have told her, you have to leave his house. That's how it has to go. And she would have had to left my house instead of me thinking I could smooth it all over. Now, that may have been what he was doing. It seemed very much like he was protecting her, but it could have been very self-serving in that to just go, look, the quicker we get rid of this situation, the quicker we can move on and continue, whatever we were going to do.
Absolutely. I think that's more common than not in these situations. And I think when it was curious for me because I'm reading a lot of people's posts on Twitter about it, and they're like, oh, clearly this, clearly that. I'm like, you either didn't watch the video, you don't know what's going on.
Right.
There's not a lot here that would give you an indication. If anything, the cops bending over backwards to release her. I mean, the questioning at the end, they went from basically someone's going to be arrested to, well, we can give her a citation. And then it slowly moved from the citation to, is he really in danger? She only weighs 90 pounds and he's a guy.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, but did it not cross anyone's mind that she could just grab a knife and stab him to death or grab a gun and shoot him?
Or pull the wheel when they're doing 50 into a tree.
Off a cliff.
Right, off a cliff.
So it was really weird to me to watch them bend over backwards to find a reason because that has nothing to do with that decision because it doesn't have to be that you can only arrest someone for domestic violence if they can go 3 rounds UFC style and take you out. Nothing to do with it. Wives shoot husbands, husbands shoot wives all the time. So then at the end, the cop walks up to her, and I think it's his sergeant at that point, and he says to her, I'm going to ask you a question. Before you answer, I want you to think really closely about what you say, because what you say is going to determine how all of this plays out. Like, why not just show her a cue card that says, read this, and I'll let you off the hook?
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, he's giving her every opportunity. You sure you don't want a lifeline for this?
Yeah, get a lifeline. Call your fucking parents.
So he says, did you intend to hurt him when you hit him? And then she goes, no. And he goes, well, doesn't sound like it meets the statutory guidelines to me.
Okay, we're all done here. Yeah.
You and I would be like in handcuffs. Like I sneezed and I hit her with my hand when I sneezed. They'd be like, yeah, she's got blood on her face. No one would buy any of that.
Right. So
that was really bizarre to me. And then they separated them and they drove him to the hotel and they gave her the keys to the car, which I get. And that makes total sense. And then after that, now whatever happens after that's a different discussion. I'm just saying, and the point I was trying to make online was that if she turns out dead, which now we know she is, and if the autopsy reveals that the injuries are consistent with a death caused by a fall from heights, let's say, and he says, well, this is what happened. We drove to this camping spot. We met up the day after. Everything was cool. She attacked me again. And in defending myself, she fell off the cliff. That's a really solid defense.
Solid.
Really solid. And what do you have to corroborate that he's been the victim of domestic violence? Oh, I don't know. 8 body cam videos from 8 different cops 5 days before this incident where he's battered. They failed to arrest her like they should have, right? So big fat lawsuit coming their way for that. And he's clearly covering for her in that. So that's the only point that I was trying to make in that. Not that he's innocent. It's just that this is really great evidence for him, potentially exculpatory evidence for his intent behind a potential accidental fall. Now, if they find her and she's bound and her head is severed off, well, then this is all moot.
Hello,
really
Twitter world.
See, I was defending myself, and then
OJ showed up in Moab, and
right.
Yeah,
then it doesn't matter.
Vinny, great point. This whole thing really is hinging on what they find as the cause of death. If there's some type of let's say one blunt force trauma, back of the head, the area around it, jibes with someone falling, hitting a rock. They see the rock. They see it works out geometrically. I could see that. They're going to have a very tough time.
Yep.
If there's strangulation, multiple blunt force trauma to the head, anything that indicates that it wasn't an accident, then they'll have a lot more to work with as far as trying to get this kid on a murder rap. But like you said, I think they're going to have a tough time. They have the witnesses that they have that this girl was the aggressor in a domestic assault case is cops. Forest rangers, fucking, like you said, 8 body cams. It's all documented. It's all
even there's another witness. There's one of the cops says I think it's the park ranger said that the initial DV call came in from a third party.
Right.
And when they said, what did she see? He said something like, well, she said she did see him push her, but she couldn't be sure whether it was defensive.
Yeah.
I mean, even that witness saw something and said it could have been him saying, get off of me.
Right,
That's the kind of thing. Her trying to crawl back in the car. He explained that. He said she got crazy and I needed time away. And I locked her out of the car. It wasn't like he locked her out of the car and scorpions were attacking her and she was trying to get back in. And he's like, screw you. Like she could have just walked away, right? We've all been in that situation where you're like, I am beyond enraged. You're not rational. I'm not rational. Get away from me.
Right.
And I'm going to go for a walk. There's nothing.
He was absolutely practicing de-escalation. If you listen to the witness and listen to what he said, look, I shut the door. I just said, why don't you take a walk? I'll take a walk. Everything he was saying is indicative of de-escalating a potentially volatile situation. So again, and that is on the video and on the tape.
Yes.
Again, without some real solid autopsy evidence, they're going to have a hard time pinning it on this kid.
And that brings us to the second major point, which again, I think it's why this is so interesting, is he ends up in the van somehow. He ends up back at his place. And now the pressure, he lawyers up, right? He goes back home and he lawyers up. And again, this is one of those, I completely understand. I have daughters myself, the frustration in how come he's not talking more? But flip it on its head, right? I also have a son. And if my son came home and said to me, hey, you know that girl I've been dating who beats up on me on occasion, and they may be aware of it, right? And she beat up on me again, by the way.
Isn't your son 6?
He's 8, yeah. I'd be like, look at you stud, yeah.
So that would be odd in and of itself.
Right on its face, I'd be like, when did this happen? Yeah, what the fuck? But if they said to you as a parent, we went camping, she attacked me. During the course of the attack, I was defending myself and she fell off a cliff, let's say, for argument's sake. I love all these people in their mind that are like, well, the parents, they should be charged or they should be cooperating with the police. Yeah. You're like, I don't get it. I understand what you're saying. And I was a former law enforcement. So believe me, I understand cooperating with law enforcement perspective, but it's so funny to me that people can suddenly not empathize and say, well, actually, that would be a tough decision because you're potentially putting your son in a very bad situation. I'm not saying people shouldn't be responsible for it, but you at that point, allowing yourself to be interviewed by the cops can only hurt you. There's nothing good that's going to come from that conversation. They're not going to go, well, this explanation jives. So we're going to let you go. And, this is just one big tragedy. What they're going to do is find every inconsistency that you said and your statement. And they're going to use that for probable cause for a search warrant of your house, to arrest you, to then get you in a point where you're in custody now. And so it's more pressure to cooperate. So as a parent, what I would tell people is that most parents would do what they think is in the best interest for their children. In some instances, in many instances, that would be, you probably need to come forward with this because it's only going to be worse for you.
Right.
But when you have a kid that comes home and the girl is nowhere to be found, and maybe he's claiming he was the victim of domestic abuse, again, switch the genders. If your daughter came home and said, I was out with my boyfriend, Dad, and we're up in the mountains, and you know how he beats up on me and you see my face? Well, he attacked me. And during the course of the attack, I shoved him and he fell off the cliff and died. Would you say the same thing? You should tell your daughter to go turn herself in and subject herself to interviews with police? Maybe you would, but most people would say, well, that's different. Why is it different? Because it's a girl?
Yeah, that's the only reason it would be different.
It's the only reason. As a parent, they're your child. And so it's just weird to me, because if I can see that, given my background, that I would always, of course, when it's appropriate, want to cooperate. But I can come up with plenty of scenarios where I would tell a friend or a loved one, yeah, you probably shouldn't talk to the police. There's really nothing you're going to get out of this.
Another thing is people really don't understand the law. You take the emotion out of it. Everything he did was completely within his right to do, to lawyer up, not talk to the cops. The police were then... it was the ball was in their court to have enough evidence to arrest him, to talk to him or not. So obviously, if they didn't arrest him, they didn't have enough evidence. The parents aren't compelled to talk to the cops either about anything. So yeah, you take that emotional angle out of it, like this motherfucker, this girl was rotting in the desert. He didn't say anything. And another point is, at a trial, I think it looks a lot better for him that a YouTube couple came forward with a video of the van. They searched around that area and found a body, as opposed to interviewing him and finding out through him where the body was. Like, oh, he led police to the body. Regardless of how she died, again, it could be self-defense, it could be an accident. It just doesn't look good to lead law enforcement to the body that you're being accused of killing.
You're locked in. What it is,
right?
How defense attorneys operate is they operate in the vacuum of information. So the worst thing for a defense attorney, anytime we had, when I was on the government side of it, the best thing to have would be statements, right? What you want is statements upon statements upon statements from the people you're looking to charge. Why? Because those statements, you don't care whether they said it was blue or red. They said something. And now you can go out and disprove that, which shows them to be a liar. And each one of those things that they lie about helps build your case. It helps build that evidence for probable cause, potentially. It helps build evidence for a search warrant or an arrest warrant, ultimately leading to a conviction. When you don't have a statement on record, what you find means that the defense has all this wiggle room, because they're going to let you paint the puzzle. And then as a defense attorney, you look at it and go, there's a gap here, there's a gap there, there's a gap here. This is where we're going to live. We're going to live in these gaps because we don't know what happened in this 3-hour time span. But if you just said, well, I drove her up to here, you've just locked yourself into being there.
Yeah.
Right now they have the van there. Now they're going to do forensics, but if they can't forensically connect him to that scene, they have to figure out a way to put him there. If he was smart enough and ditched his cell phone, and the only thing they have is a car there, and then he says, guess you'll never guess what happened. The van got stolen. She wandered off in the van. And then I found the van. It was returned 5 days later. It sounds crazy, but they can get away with that without saying, no, you told us you drove there. So now you're locked into that. And that's what people don't get, is the whole reason for the interview or the interrogation is, when I sat down with people, is to lock them into a story. What the story was at that point. I just want your story, because when you're lying, there's no way, even the sociopaths I dealt with, there's no way they can create a sophisticated enough lie that after enough investigation, the truth couldn't just rip to shreds. It might get you through that interview, but then when you go back and you start pulling records, and like in this case, right, the cell phone towers aren't going to be incredibly important. Where those pings came up, online communications, when they signed into Twitter and Instagram and they were tweeting, they're looking at all of that now to map out where he was and where she was. And anytime they can put those two together, he's going to have to explain how he doesn't know that, but yet he's in the same general area as she is when her phone was active.
By not talking, there's no base to go by. And they say, well, you said this, we have this. It's like, it's done backwards. We have this. And it's like, oh yeah, well, I was there. Yeah. I did that.
And
I did.
Yes,
like you
and
could.
That's why the right to remain silent exists. That's why you have a 5th and 6th Amendment to say, well, I don't have to do your job. You're the FBI agent. You're the cop. Like you need me to like get me in trouble. Like, no, you go do your job, and then I'll deal with the consequences of that, which might be, you might come down harder on me. Absolutely. Tons of my defendants didn't cooperate. I didn't take it personally, but
Yeah.
of course I would make sure that then if I expended all this time and energy investigating something, then I wasn't interested in hearing about you wanted to cooperate maybe after the fact. And there were plenty of witnesses that said 2 years ago when I approached you was the time to cooperate with me. Now I've got all the answers. I don't need you anymore. I'll tell you who else was at the murder. 2 of your friends are already cooperating with us. They've been wearing a wire for a year and a half. I don't need you to pile on to that, right? So that's the absolute risk of that. But it's funny how people expect this, like, well, the parents should have been cooperating more and he should have been cooperating more. Would you have? Would anyone? Would you tell your kid to? I'm not so sure. All these people who seem to be really, great citizens that will like always communicate with the police. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that would really match up in real life to a lot of scenarios you might find yourself in. I mean, fuck, how many people when they get pulled over can't even admit to speeding? They can't even admit to speeding.
That's
the
true.
cop's like, oh, was I really speeding? I'd have lost track of 120. I didn't think I was going that fast. Like, give me but these are the same people that are like, oh yeah, if I was involved in a murder, my son was, I'd be like, hey, police officer, my son was involved in a homicide.
Come get him. Yeah,
come arrest him.
How do you think? Laundrie slipped away there? Do you think they just had nothing to do? They couldn't just grab him. He literally could have, I guess, walked out and just walked down the street in front of the cops and said, "Hey, I'm taking off." Again, unless they had something substantial to hold him on, I don't see that he couldn't have just left.
Oh no, he was free to do whatever he wanted. But the FBI is free to surveil them. So I don't know how many surveillances I did where we were watching subjects who we suspected crimes. When we found when those sources came forward and we found those where we believed the bodies were buried, we later validated. I remember that 2 nights before we started digging, we were literally watching a grave where we thought a body was in case somebody found out that so-and-so was cooperating with us.
It's got to move it. You got to get that out of there. We got to get it out of there.
Yeah, we find a wing and a lung and a heart 2 days later. But so on a subject, you would always do surveillance on subjects if you thought they were about to do something violent or flee. You'd put 24/7 surveillance on them. Now, that's easier said than done. It's very easy to lose people, even trained professionals. Surveillance is really hard. So if they comes out later and said, no, we had 24/7 surveillance, but he got in a car, he went to the mall, and then he jumped out and took an Uber. Yeah, that's explainable. You can that makes sense. But if it turns out they had no surveillance on him, that's a real head scratcher for me. Because again, going to his overall defense, right? Like now I'm thinking as a defense attorney, putting together those arguments, you have the arguably quasi-botched police stop where they didn't arrest her. Then you have the botched potential surveillance or non-existent surveillance that he could have very easily left to go destroy more evidence. He could have moved the body. He could have do anything at that point. And you're not watching him, which is insane. How could it be this person of interest that you think clearly was involved in this, and yet you don't think to follow him or even his family members at that point, keep in mind, because they might be cooperating with him. So that was really interesting. Or the other argument is they just leaked that they lost him because they really were on him, like, white on rice. And he's listening to the news reports and he thinks, I'm home free. Meanwhile, there's agents everywhere following him.
Right, seeing what he's doing, if he is trying to destroy anything or
You don't say, you have to put something out that says we lost them. Because if you say, Brian Laundrie's missing and FBI's following him and he's like, oh, really? They are? Shit. I guess I'll, do whatever. So there's a lot more to be told for that. What happened with that?
How difficult is it that the crime scene, let's say, or potential crime scene of things like the van, where the body was found, where Laundrie ends up, spans thousands of miles and multiple jurisdictions and whatnot? It just seems like that would be a lot more difficult than if everything happens in, one place, in one town. There's the house, there's the cop's jurisdiction, there's the place the guy works is all within, 10 miles of each other. This seems how spread out and how vast that area in Wyoming is. And then they have the police stop in Moab, and then he's in Florida. That seems to confuse things a little bit.
Oh, yeah. And that's probably why they asked for FBI assistance. People are probably wondering why the FBI is involved anyway. So, we were asked often.
Well, pretty white girl.
Yeah, no, that's the squad actually.
That's pretty much the criteria.
PWG squad. They're like, oh, pretty white girl went missing. But it's all matters where each of the events happen. So the vastness of it becomes a big problem for local law enforcement because jurisdictionally they're in a situation. They're now flying to other states to pull evidence. That's the whole reason why really the FBI kind of exists, is that the cross state jurisdiction and the offices, the way we communicate it is very seamless. So we call cutting a lead. It's very easy. You could either just fly out, and I did that tons of times, where I would just get on a plane and fly to California and continue to work my investigation. I didn't have to like talk to the LAPD and be like, I want to fly in from New York. But if I was a cop, I would. I couldn't just show up, Sipowicz style in LA and start working, a murder investigation out of New York. That doesn't work. So it logistically for local law enforcement presents a much bigger problem. Logistically for the FBI, much less problem. And then as to what they find, like forensically, it really matters where everything happened. If the murder happened in the car and was contained to the car or even a campsite, and then the body was moved, which is more than likely what happened. Whether they were camping where the van was or they were in the area and he murdered her, given where the body was found, it doesn't look like there was a ton of premeditation, like a swamp. Like, he looks like he dumped her fairly close to off of where that picture, where that van was parked, which again doesn't show a ton of premeditation, especially if that really is. I don't know if you saw that video of him digging, potentially. It shows someone digging broad daylight. And that really goes to show that this was more spontaneous than anything else. But the fact that they found the body, so what they said, end of August, right, was when she went missing.
Yeah.
So it's hot out there. Assuming the animals didn't really get to it yet, there's still going to be a ton of forensic value to that body, as compared to 2, 3, 4 years later down the road kind of thing. It's not the best crime scene you're ever going to find by any stretch. It's not like she was dropped in the snow where you really have something, containing everything. Yeah. But there's going to be a ton. I mean, where he buried, there's going to be fibers. There's going to be tons of soft tissue to do analysis on. Toxicology is not going to be a problem. Was she high or drunk or, injected with something? Looking for signs of strangulation around the eyes and the neck area. All of that is still going to be readily apparent. Only a short, matter of weeks later. So forensically, they're going to have a ton to work with. Where it all happened, if he said she fell off a cliff, that's the thing, right? At some point, he would have to bring that up, because let's say they found something that connected her to him. By the way, him not cooperating means they didn't get under his fingernails, right? So they'll look under, they didn't get to see bruising or marks on his hands for punching her, or maybe even choking her. You can get bruising from that. So that's all gone. Under her fingernails, they could find his skin, and they'll be looking for that to see if there's defensive wounds on her.
Then again, hey, she scratched him once, and the cops have evidence of that.
Yep.
He could just say, yeah, she did it again. It was fucking terrible. I got scratched.
Yep.
So
is it possible even some of that's left over from the previous attack? Possible. Someone would have to concede. Yeah, not likely, because she's going to wash her hands.
Not likely, but he could absolutely say it happened again. Like,
it happened a second time.
A second time.
A week
and
later.
Then having the van in his possession for that entire drive from Wyoming down to Florida, can't that be a case for contaminated evidence? If something's found, or the lack of
not
some
even
evidence?
That, but normally when they try to tie, when a homicide happens, when it's two people that don't know each other, once you identify the subject, it becomes easy, because there's no explanation as to why her DNA would be. Her DNA's, they lived in that thing.
Right.
So
Jesus
even
Christ,
even if they find blood in there, as long as it doesn't look like, OJ scene, and there's not blood on the roof.
Cast-off spatter from a hammer.
As long as there's nothing like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she would sit on the end of the van and shave her legs, and this was her razor, and now there's blood in the inside where she dumped the razor. There's a million reasons for that.
Yeah.
So that and that's why it's hard, because she has every right. They knew each other. He's not a serial killer where just getting them connected in the same room is damning evidence. There's going to be 8 levels below that you're going to have to get, which is you're in the same room in the same location. He could say they got into a fight. They wanted to cool off. She took the van drove off, and that was the last I saw of her. The only thing that he has to do is explain how he ended up back in the van. But as to what happened during that time period, she could have went off and met a serial killer.
Right.
And if they can't prove that the injuries were caused by him forensically, which is hard to do because you're going to have to find something that connects him to, if it's strangulation, you're going to have to connect his hands to those strangulation marks,
that's
bite marks.
That isn't even a given that it's him. That just means someone strangled her.
Her.
How do you now tie it to him when he hasn't backed himself into a corner with a story? It really, I hope the fuck he didn't kill himself, because I'm very interested in seeing how legally this whole thing plays out.
Yeah, I think a lot of lawyers and a lot of people who think that way are thinking the same thing, which is this is one of those weird hypotheticals where to see how it actually would play out in court would be very, very fascinating, especially when he did not make any statements. This almost never happened.
Yeah.
Other than the video of the stop, which I argue projects him in a overall positive light compared to what the hell was going on there.
Yeah.
Other than that video, from my understanding, there are no statements that he made. So he gets to go into this trial potentially clean.
Oof.
Like every lawyer's wet dream, right?
Yeah.
The nightmare for every lawyer is dealing with the statements that your clients made to the police before they lawyered up. And you're like, this is why. That could also be, recorded phone calls, which they don't have in this case and things like that. They just have to deal with the digital evidence, which is going to be a ton because they were young and they were on social media like crazy.
Yep.
And they had their devices, and I don't know how smart he was about that. So there's going to be tons of digital evidence showing where these phones were active during what time periods. It doesn't put them behind the keyboard, but it puts their phones in a place that could be together or apart.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have that physical evidence from the forensics from the body and what they're getting from the van. And I think they pulled some stuff out of the parents' house, which is going to be minimally useful unless this idiot saved like a rope that he choked her with and like left it in his room, So that's going to be minimally helpful.
The phone thing is very interesting because the mother claims that the text that she got from Gabby that said that there's no signal at Yosemite where they were, she doesn't believe. Now, again, there's a lot of emotions tied into that. It's the mother. If she thinks something happened to her daughter, of course, she's going to be a little biased on, I don't think that was her. It could have well been. Who knows?
Yep.
But, where was that text sent from? What was the date? Can they come up with a time and date of death on the body based on how long it's been there? Things like that. Maybe there's something on her that shows what the date was. That's going to be very important when it comes to these phone records, corroborating those with the physical evidence. And then, did she send that out? If not, who did? Where is her fucking phone? Have we heard that?
No, I'm sure the phone is gone. That's what I was about to say. I'm sure the phone is gone. Maybe he left it with the body. And not to mention, even if it's there, it could be damaged. It'll probably survive. It also could be locked out. And as we know, that's, much harder to get into a phone with a proper pin. If you set a proper pin, if it's your birthday or whatever, it'll be easier. But let's assume they can't get into the phone because odds are there's so many things that could have happened between it being destroyed, thrown away, locked out. There's still ways to corroborate it independently through cloud data, right? So there's the stuff that you keep on your phone, which is definitely the most damning. But then there's the stuff that when you interact with social media, for example, that they're harvesting on their end. So she says, I don't think it was her that sent the message. That's fine. But what they could do is look at her online activity before and after that message and see if it's consistent with her. So if a minute after she sent that text message, for example, then she wrote an email and sent an email to a friend with a picture of something, well, then it's more than likely it was her, right? Because now the following message is consistent with her, right? It was like, I'm not going to be home on time for that, or whatever it may be. If there's nothing after that, well, then that starts to look like it wasn't her because you're like, that's weird. How long would a kid her age not go on social media and post something or not send an email or not go send a DM? All of that stuff's logged on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. They collect all of that. So search warrants have been issued for all of that already. And the cyber squads at the FBI are going through that to piece together a timeline to say, where do we think her legitimate activity stopped? And where do we think his activity of having the phone started? And that's not that difficult to do when you have a baseline of, petabytes of data that these companies are collecting on all of us. When you start acting differently, it's like when you're looking at that data, it's easy as black and white to see.
Oh, isn't that amazing? Yeah, there's
we create our own fingerprint.
Right.
Yes.
You're a pattern that follows
Yes.
a certain set of rules that you've made for yourself. And then when it goes off book, it's so noticed and it's so obvious, that you've done that.
Not even to investigators, but anyone who's walked away from anything on social media, it'll trigger. All of a sudden, Facebook will start sending you stuff to tickle the wire. Next thing you know, I noticed I'm almost never on Facebook. The longer I'm on Facebook that I'm not on Facebook, the hotter the invitations I'm getting from the women. They get hotter exponentially. The longer I go, they've gone from 2s to like at 9s. Like where I'm like, they know I'm going to click on this because they're trying to bring me back
I'm back.
Friend requests. Yeah, friend requests. And it's like the girl of my dreams. She probably doesn't even exist. It's just an amalgamation of everything I've liked in my history. And they're like, they put together a fake woman and she wants to be my friend.
Right. She wants to talk to you. And she's right in your town.
Yeah, she's always right in my area and she wants to link up.
God, that's amazing.
They can see that. They can see that just from their algorithms.
Yeah.
That's not a person doing that. That's an algorithm. But if you actually invest human capital into doing these investigations, the agents looking at this are going to see look at this drop off from here to here.
Right. It does.
It's
not
where,
consistent.
Obviously, right. The murder probably happened. Or how about this? Just the absence of your phone on the network when the phone is shut off.
Why'd you do that? No one shuts their fucking
phone off. So anomalous,
right?
We never shut our phones off, and even when you're charging them, they're on. So if you see the phone, all right, the phone could go dead, but the phone's not going to be dead for 3-4 days straight.
Right.
So you're going to say, the phone went off on this date. This is probably right after the murder happened because the first thing he's going to do is go over to the phone and shut it off or smash it.
Then
That's when he's figuring out, I have a body here. What am I going to do with it? So even the things you don't provide insight to what happened. Shutting the phone off is like a great move, right? Well, yeah, you basically bookmarked for them when the murder happened.
It's like the Columbo episode where the problem was not that there were fingerprints on the closet door, but there weren't fingerprints on the closet door.
How could she possibly have gotten a nightgown out of the closet if there's
too
no
clean of a crime
fingerprints on that door?
Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk to quickly Pete the cop. He's got some insight on DVs. Pete, what's up, man?
Hey, Ant, how are you?
Good. Got Vinny here. Oh, hi.
I was listening to it with bated breath. A lot of great points.
Yeah.
I'm sitting down here in the Outer Banks, man. I'm watching F-18s fly by. I'm watching helicopters, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's great to be out of the city for a week.
No shit.
But I'm sitting here. Now that I actually have free time, I've been starting to catch up on this case. There's a lot of different points here. I mean, we should prepare ourselves for the eventuality. They may come back with no finding on the autopsy, undetermined. We're going to wait for toxicology, which is really going to send people off the cliff because they want answers.
Right.
There's a lot of different. I mean, the FBI, top notch with the cyber stuff and with the phones. We don't know where her phone is. This guy might have want to throw a little shit in the game. Just leave her phone on and drive back to Florida. So that phone is pinging across the United States. We don't know that, though. There's a lot of unknowns here. I was watching that tape with the cops.
Right.
Now, each state is different in the laws, how you handle domestic violence incidents. In New York State now, and it's been this way probably since mid to late 90s, you can lose your job, you can lose your pension as a police officer if there's a situation that calls for an arrest and you don't make an arrest.
Yeah.
And sometimes you will go in, especially in places that have precincts like in New York City, you could be going to the same knuckleheads' houses 2-3 times a week. And when I was a patrol sergeant, I would show up and I said, if somebody's got blood on them or if the place is wrecked, somebody's going in handcuffs. These two people, and again, I'm not knocking the cops out there, but this is where you got to be careful. And one of the redacted reports that they did on the incident, they took out what they were both suffering from, but the female did state, we're both off on medication. And you're like, that's when, as the sergeant, you're at that oh shit moment. And, it's unfortunate. Two people, both with issues, come together. I agree with you. I think he was trying to protect us somewhat. But I also got a weird vibe off this guy.
Yeah, there was a weird vibe off of him. You bring up a good point there. In hindsight, it's easier. You could watch 20. Let's say you watch 20 tapes just like that. Two people, domestic. They talk. It wasn't crazy like Black Eye and Bloody Nose. 20 similar tapes. And then you go, okay, one of these resulted in one of these people being dead a couple of weeks later. The odds that you're going to pick it out are astronomical. Like that. In hindsight, it's easy to go, oh, look, he seems a little too cheerful. He seems this. At the time, those cops were just looking at two young people that had fucked up. Like, what the fuck are they doing in their van in the middle of nowhere? Let's try to cut them a little break so they don't have to be run through the system in any way. Yeah. Now, also, they were talking about arresting her or at least citing her and then separating them. Now, the fact that they did separate them for the night, that really kind of takes the onus off of them, the cops, as far as not doing anything. They only would have been separated for that same amount of time, even if there had been legal documentation of domestic violence and her getting cited and then him having to pay some kind of a thing and then the court date like they talked about. I think the end result would have been still they spent just as much time apart from each other as they would have legally, and this all still just would have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bound to end badly at some point in the future for these two.
I don't think they could tell,
I don't mean to cast any aspersions on them. But this was not a match made in heaven. No, it's you know what? Unfortunately, I think it's very, very common these days to have two fucking mental patients dating each other, thinking that they're going to be YouTube stars and driving across the country, not realizing you have to live with each other in very close quarters for a long period of time, and you're going to drive each other's nuts because you're both batshit and immature.
Yeah, immature.
On a different point, I think it's going to be interesting because something we haven't brought up yet are the plate readers. They're going to be pretty much everywhere you go. You're not driving across the United States.
Right. They got it somewhere. Everywhere you go. Your plate's red. On the plate readers. It pops up, right.
Photographs. Now, you got this guy back in Florida. And, everything in law enforcement, a lot of times it's based on personal relationships when getting assistance from other agencies. Like I may know somebody in the FBI can help me out. Bing, we get moving fast. You have a small jurisdiction down in Florida. They're getting a call from Wyoming, and they might be, they split up. She took off with some other dude or whatever.
Right. Always just trying to knock it off as something that you don't have to work too hard on. Right.
And for the Florida guys, I mean, technically speaking, this is not that big of shit. It is now, of course. But, you got a small agency and these small county sheriffs. You want to do a surveillance. It's major labor intensive to watch somebody around the clock. And then brought up the point that, this guy could duck into a mall and go out the back door in an Uber. My gut feeling, and I'm just reading just before the show came on, I read a little bit about some of the updates. They no longer think he's in the swamp. Where he originally went to hide. I mean, and when I heard that, maybe he went in there and offed himself, and some gator is chewing on his leg right now. But it's not an easy task to just totally disappear off the grid. You need a lot of cash on hand. You have to go totally radio silent.
Yeah.
And for a guy like him,
this kid's not equipped.
No.
He's not equipped to go Jason Bourne and end up in Prague.
Yeah.
This kid couldn't drive a van across the country without getting pulled over, and
no, he would have to get to like the Mexican border somewhere, which is wide open anyways. It's not an issue crossing back and forth.
He's got to get his way through the Haitians though to get to Mexico.
We should give him COVID and send him across the border that way.
No shit.
Negate one coming this way.
He'd have to wade through the Taliban that's coming in our direction.
Pete, thanks so much, man. You give a good insight from the law enforcement side. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, thank you, Ant.
Take it easy. There goes Pete. Before I let you go, Vinny, great fucking take on this whole thing. I've been really interested reading your posts on Twitter and your texts and everything. But I also got to ask you, pop up a Abercrombie and Snitch
I knew I was going to get asked.
all I was thinking about, of course, this past weekend, they had the kind of support rally for the January 6th insurrectionists. And this thing was hilarious because it seemed like there were more press and law enforcement at this thing than there were actually these crazy white supremacists that are trying to overthrow the government. And all these guys are getting caught up in these memes now that really do look like they're right out of fucking the FBI here. Now, do you know any of these guys first, Vinny? Have you ever met any of these gentlemen?
But I probably looked at this photo no less than 75 times in the last how many hours or days since it's been posted. And I actually was writing some of my former roommates from Quantico today. And I was like, it's funny when you see this because at first you kind of dismiss it. And then I look, I'm like, it looks like every FBI agent who was on SWAT, FBI SWAT I've ever worked with when I was there for 11 years. Like every single one of them, it looks exactly like that. And so, yeah, super suspicious in my opinion. And if they don't work for the FBI, I would say they probably do work for law enforcement. Yeah. Looking at like their pockets and stuff, like I don't see any of them carrying. None of them would necessarily if you're, undercover. You're definitely not going to carry your credentials. But just the way that they're dressed and how clean cut they are, it could just be surveillance. And circling back to what we were just talking about,
you're right.
People always on Twitter, I see this all the time. Like, oh, here was a undercover. There's like a spectrum here, right? You could be not acting in like a uniform, but not undercover. So surveillance is a perfect example of that. When you're doing surveillance, right? If we were working sources, or like I used to go to the San Gennaro feast all the time, right? Because the Colombos, own the entire feast. And I would go, my source would be there, or I would be looking to see if there's other people there. And you'd be acting, undercover. I mean, you're in street clothes, but you weren't like undercover. You're just doing surveillance, really.
Yeah, people probably look and go, "Oh, that's fucking Donnie Brasco right there."
Right. But if you're gonna do that, that's what's surprising about this is that I never got accused. I had more time convincing people I actually was an agent.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. And I to the point where I got arrested more than once, even though I told them I was an agent. They still arrested me and took my gun and handcuffed me in one instance. So this is a really bad job if they really are doing surveillance. Why are you all together in a group like you're about to like break out into like doo-wop or something like a boy band?
It's like a frat party
with the shades, like they're gonna all of a sudden be like in the still of the night. Like what? Why are you together? Why are you all so clean cut? Why are you all wearing shades?
Yeah,
you have the same. Three of them look like they're wearing the same watch. You're all in shape, which is another red flag.
The fucking the memes are so funny. It was Abercrombie and Snitch was the one, and then the other one was OnlyFeds. They had OnlyFans, but OnlyFeds.
There's another one of a guy who there's a video, and I didn't get to really examine it closely, but he absolutely was law enforcement, probably FBI. But he's wearing like a black mask, and the police go up to him. And he's carrying, and he's got apparently he's got his weapon on him, which might have been the whole reason he got kind of stopped.
Yeah, they saw.
And he says my creds are in my whatever, which is what you call them, creds, credentials. FBI just call them creds. So that was telling. And then he says, "Are you undercover?" Which is such a weird question to ask an undercover. Like, I mean, so now what do you say? Like, if you are undercover, you can't answer it honestly.
You punch him in the face and go, "Guy, want to suck my cock?"
Yeah, grab my prick.
You grab my prick. You want to suck my cock?
Yeah, this one.
Here he is.
Right, I'm gonna get the creds. Get back there.
What happened?
Back up, please. Cruiser 100. We have the individual stop. You guys just give us a little space, all right?
Yeah, they open up this fucking little creds. He's got his badge. He's got, all right. Damn it. We were hoping to get our cool riot gear dirty today. They went home with the cleanest riot gear of any fucking event ever. Yeah, you're trying to get Trumpers.
What's your name?
Yeah. What are we doing? Vinny, you're fucking awesome. I'm going to be following. What's your Twitter so people can follow you on Twitter?
Proof of Work 1.
Proof
There
of
it
Work 1. There it is.
Yeah.
It's Vinny puts a great take on things like this Gabby Petito case, and gets you thinking. Great job, Vinny. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Talk to you guys soon.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Later.